The Middle Ages, castles echoing with the whispers of intrigue behind thick stone walls, the rhythmic pounding of hooves on misty mornings, and brave hearts beating beneath cold steel armor. In this age, honor, loyalty, and courage had a name: the knight. Becoming a knight was not just about stepping onto the battlefield. It was a long journey that began in childhood. It started with a ceremony of respect and continued with a lifelong commitment. Sometimes fighting beside a king, sometimes protecting a helpless villager, and sometimes tilting a lance just to win a lady's heart. But what lay behind the armor? Have you ever wondered how a knight truly lived? How he fought? And what he believed in? This video will take you into the glorious, and at times harsh, world of the Middle Ages, where knights were trained step by step, fought for their lords, and left behind a legacy that shaped history. If you're ready, let the swords shine, and let the age of chivalry begin. What is knighthood? In the Middle Ages, being a knight wasn't just about knowing how to fight. It meant living a life of honor, loyalty, and courage. Over time, knighthood evolved from a simple military profession into a way of life, a moral code. Knights were not only warriors on the battlefield, but defenders of justice and faith. The word knight literally meant a mounted soldier. In French, chevalier, and in English, knight, both referred to those who fought on horseback. But by the 9th century, the term began to represent a distinct social class within Europe's feudal system. What began as mounted warriors turned into noblemen with land, servants, and status. Knighthood, throughout the Middle Ages, was shaped by religious, military, and social values. Under the influence of the Catholic Church, knights were seen not only as fighters, but also as protectors of the faith, battling against evil, injustice, and unbelief. In many cases, they carried both the sword and the cross. A knight's life was built on certain principles. He had to be brave, unflinching in battle. He owed loyalty to his lord, his king, and to God. He was expected to defend the weak, act justly, help the poor, and above all, protect his honor. These virtues formed the foundation of knighthood. A knight could not rely on strength alone. He needed to carry compassion in his heart, treating even his enemy with dignity. Respecting women, children, and the elderly was a vital part of chivalric values. In this way, knighthood was more than just a military institution. It was a way of life. Over time, these values were formalized through oaths. Knight candidates were required to swear loyalty to these ideals before being granted the title. The knight's vow: to serve God and king, protect the innocent, and never flee from battle, set them apart from ordinary soldiers. In the feudal system, knights usually served a lord or a king. In return for their loyalty, they were granted land and titles. They became not only warriors, but also administrators. They defended castles, protected the local people, and even acted as judges when necessary. Today, when we say someone acts like a knight, we recall these same values: courage, loyalty, honor, and justice. These were the ideals a true knight was expected to carry, and centuries later, they still inspire admiration. Because knighthood wasn't just worn on the body, it was carried in the heart. Knight training. In the Middle Ages, becoming a knight didn't happen overnight, and it certainly didn't begin on the battlefield. It was a long, demanding process that started at a very young age and required strict discipline, years of training, and unwavering determination. Most knights came from noble families. At around the age of 7, a young boy would leave his home and be sent to live in the household of another nobleman or lord. From that moment on, he would begin his training as a page, the very first step toward knighthood. As a page, the boy was trained in physical endurance and social etiquette. He learned how to speak properly, how to greet nobles, how to behave with grace at the dining table. But it wasn't all manners and formality. Pages also learned the basics of combat. They practiced archery, swordplay with wooden blades, horseback riding, and served as assistants to older knights. At the age of 14, the page became a squire. This was the most critical stage before becoming a full-fledged knight. As a squire, the young man served directly under a knight. He would accompany his master into battle, carry his armor, prepare his weapons, and take care of his horse. In return, he received advanced combat training, real swords, tougher drills, and horseback jousting techniques. Being a squire was also a test of character. This was when values like courage, loyalty, patience, and honor were truly developed. Because strength alone wasn't enough, a knight had to be brave in heart, obedient in duty, and loyal to his lord and people. Around the age of 20 or 21, if the squire had proven himself, he would be deemed ready for knighthood. But before receiving the title, he had to undergo a sacred ceremony called dubbing. The process began with a night of prayer and purification. The candidate would spend the night in a chapel, reflecting on his sins and seeking forgiveness. On the day of the ceremony, dressed in noble garments, he would kneel before his lord or king. A sword would lightly touch his shoulders, first the left, then the right, and he would rise as a knight. This was not just a promotion, it was a transformation. From that moment forward, he could carry his own coat of arms, ride into battle under his own banner, and command his own retainers. This path, however, was mostly reserved for the nobility. Rarely, a commoner might be knighted on the battlefield for extraordinary bravery. But for the most part, knighthood was a privilege earned through lineage and honor. Knight training aimed not only to create strong warriors, but to shape men of virtue and leadership. Because true knighthood wasn't just about wielding a sword. It was about living with honor. A knight's daily life. In the Middle Ages, knights were not warriors only summoned for war. They were the backbone of the feudal system, both as military power and as part of the nobility. A knight's daily life was filled not just with battle preparations, but also with duties of governance, protection, training, and setting an example for society. A knight's routine largely depended on where he lived and whom he served. If he was in the service of a powerful lord or king, he often lived in a castle serving as both guard and noble. Others held lands of their own, acting as regional protectors and landlords. The day typically began at dawn, often with prayer. Faith was central to a knight's life. After prayer came physical training, riding, sparring, archery, and weapons practice. A knight had to maintain both strength and skill at all times. Swordplay and horsemanship were essential, but so were strategy and endurance. During times of peace, knights had local responsibilities. They were protectors of their communities. If a villager had a complaint, a stolen animal, a land dispute, or a threat, they often turned to the local knight for resolution. Knights helped enforce the law, collect taxes, and keep order in their regions. When war came, everything changed. Months of preparation began. Weapons were sharpened, armor repaired, horses trained. A knight did not go to battle alone. He was often accompanied by squires, attendants, and armor-bearers. In battle, knights formed the front lines, charging on horseback with precision and force. But battle was not their only arena. Knights also participated in the life of the court. They attended feasts, advised lords, and played political roles. Art, music, and poetry were important parts of a noble knight's life. Writing letters, composing verses, or simply learning to express loyalty and love, especially to a noble lady, were seen as signs of refinement. Meals were formal occasions. Knights followed strict etiquette at the table. Roasted meats were common, particularly from the hunt, and wine or ale accompanied most meals. But despite the indulgence, excess was frowned upon. A knight was expected to be moderate, disciplined, and well-mannered. Tournaments were the highlight of peacetime. These staged events mimicked real combat and were used to maintain fighting skills while entertaining the public. Knights competed for glory, prizes, and recognition. The people cheered, nobles watched with keen interest, and many knights gained fame from their performances in the arena. The life of a knight may seem full of privilege, and in many ways it was, but it also came with weighty responsibilities. Discipline, service, and honor were not just words. They were a way of life. Because for a true knight, what mattered most was not how brightly his armor shone, but how truly his heart beat for duty. The art of war and armor. In the Middle Ages, knowing how to fight wasn't enough. A knight had to master the art of war. Battle was not simply chaos, it was a deadly dance of strategy, timing, and discipline. From the weapons they wielded to the armor they wore, everything a knight carried was designed for both survival and honor. The knight's most iconic weapon was the sword. Long, heavy, and sharp on both sides. It was more than a blade. It was a symbol of status. Many knights had swords engraved with family crests, religious phrases, or personal oaths. To lose one's sword in battle was to lose more than a weapon. It was to lose one's pride. Alongside the sword, the lance played a key role, especially during cavalry charges. With its long reach, a lance could unhorse an enemy in a single strike. In tournaments, lances were dulled for safety, but in real battle, they were lethal. Knights also carried secondary weapons, daggers, maces, axes, each suited to a different type of combat. In close quarters, when swords were too large to use effectively, these tools made the difference between life and death. But it wasn't just offense that mattered. Armor was a knight's first line of defense. In early medieval times, knights wore chainmail, thousands of interlocked metal rings that provided flexibility and protection. Chainmail was lightweight compared to later armor, but vulnerable to piercing attacks. By the 14th and 15th centuries, full-plate armor became the standard. Crafted from solid steel, it covered the knight from head to toe. Breastplates, greaves, gauntlets, and helmets were fitted together with precise engineering. Helmets often had visors that could be lowered in battle and lifted for visibility. Though it looked heavy, a full suit of armor was surprisingly mobile in the hands of a trained knight. The average suit weighed between 25 and 30 kilograms, enough to protect, but not too much to hinder movement or riding. Armor was also a form of identity. Knights often had customized armor with crests, colors, and embellishments. Shields bore heraldic symbols that identified friends and foes on the battlefield. A knight's look was as much about fear and awe as it was about functionality. War horses were equally important. Bred for strength and endurance, they were trained to respond to commands in the heat of battle. These horses were often armored themselves, wearing metal or leather coverings to protect against arrows and blades. Victory on the battlefield required more than brute strength. A knight needed control, awareness, and the ability to adapt. Training was lifelong. Even the best armor couldn't save a man who lacked discipline and instinct. The battlefield tested not just the metal of a sword, but the metal of the soul. Tournaments and fame. In the Middle Ages, The battlefield wasn't the only place where a knight could prove his worth. Tournaments were grand public events, part competition, part spectacle, where knights demonstrated their skills, tested their courage, and earned glory in the eyes of nobles and commoners alike. A tournament was not just a game. It was a serious event, often held in times of peace to keep knights trained and ready for war. It was also a social gathering, bringing together lords, ladies, merchants, musicians, and villagers from miles around. The air was filled with excitement. For a knight, this was more than entertainment. It was a stage to win honor, reputation, and sometimes even the attention of a noble lady. The most iconic event of the tournament was jousting. Two knights, fully armored and mounted on powerful horses, charged at each other with long wooden lances, aiming to unseat their opponent with a single blow. It was a dramatic and dangerous contest, demanding not only strength, but also precision and balance. The clash of metal, the shattering of lances, the roar of the crowd, all made jousting the highlight of the medieval tournament. But tournaments included much more than jousting. There were melee battles, where groups of knights fought in teams. There were sword duels, archery contests, and displays of skill on horseback. Though these events were less deadly than real battles, they were still full of risk. Injuries, and even fatalities, were not uncommon. Tournaments were also a test of a knight's character. Chivalry didn't end when the match began. Knights were expected to follow rules of honor, saluting their opponent before a fight, never striking a man who had fallen, and accepting defeat with grace. To win by cheating was to lose one's name. In a world where honor was everything, how you fought was just as important as whether you won. The rewards of victory were more than just trophies. A successful knight could gain land, titles, and royal favor. Perhaps more importantly, he gained fame. His name would be spoken in noble courts, written into poems, and sung in songs. And for many, the favor of a noblewoman, a rose, a ribbon, a whispered word, was worth more than gold. Tournaments were a vital part of a knight's life. They provided a place to grow, to shine, to be seen. But with fame came responsibility. A true knight knew that glory was not just about being admired. It was about living in a way that deserved admiration. Because in the end, to win the crowd was easy. To win respect, that was the real challenge. The fall and legacy of knighthood. For centuries, knights ruled the battlefields, protected castles, and inspired generations with their honor and bravery. But time does not stand still. The world changed, and with it, the age of knights slowly came to an end. One of the biggest reasons for this fall was the rise of gunpowder. In the 14th century, firearms began to appear on European battlefields. Cannons could destroy castle walls. Muskets could pierce armor from a distance. The heavily armored knight, once nearly invincible in combat, became vulnerable. Alongside this, the nature of warfare changed. Armies no longer relied only on noble-born warriors. Instead, kings and lords began to hire professional soldiers, paid men who could be trained quickly and outfitted with modern weapons. Strategy replaced chivalry. The knight, with all his ceremony and code, was slowly pushed aside. At the same time, feudalism began to collapse. Power shifted from local lords to centralized kings. Cities grew, trade expanded, and money began to matter more than land. The world was entering a new era, one of commerce, bureaucracy, and industry. In this new world, the knight no longer had a place. But knighthood was more than armor and horses. It was a system of values, courage, loyalty, justice, mercy, that could outlive any sword. And those values, though no longer tied to the battlefield, found a new life in art, literature, and culture. Writers and thinkers of the Renaissance revived the image of the noble knight. Stories like Don Quixote poked fun at the outdated knight, but also mourned his loss. In the centuries that followed, knights became symbols of a better world, a world of honor, of idealism, of doing what's right, even when no one is watching. Even today, some countries still award knighthood as an honorary title, not for battle, but for service to society. Artists, scientists, and leaders are dubbed Sir or Dame as recognition of their contributions. When we say someone is knightly or chivalrous today, we still mean the same thing. Brave, noble, just, compassionate. The swords have rusted, the castles have crumbled, the armor rests in museums. But the legacy of knighthood, it still lives, not in steel, but in the hearts of those who choose to live with honor. Conclusion: to be a knight in the Middle Ages was to take an oath and to live by it. From childhood training to battlefield courage, from courtly manners to honorable duels, the knight stood for more than war. He stood for a set of ideals that echoed through time. Yes, the world has changed. The wars are different. The weapons, the politics, the people, all transformed. But some things remain eternal. Courage, loyalty, justice, honor. We may not wear armor anymore, but we still face battles. And in those battles, what we choose to defend defines who we truly are. Thank you for watching this journey into the world of knights. We hope you didn't just learn about history, but felt the spirit of knighthood come alive again. Because every age has its challenges, and every age still needs its knights.